So before we get started, does anybody have any comments or questions that you'd like to bring up before we get started here? Okay. I'd just like to go over this bit starting at 1596, 15.96. So I'll just read a little bit and then we can talk about it. It says, at that time, this was the Bodhisattva was explaining his motivations, why he is on this path. He says, so he says to his to Shanda, his attendant, he says, at that time, Shanda, who has now cried even harder, exclaimed, Lord, is your resolve based on conviction? And the Bodhisattva replied, Shanda, listen to this about my resolve. I will strive to benefit and liberate beings. My resolve is like a mountain, immutable, unchangeable, and firm. It is as difficult to move as Meru, the king of mountains. Shanda then asked, Lord, how can you be so certain? And the Bodhisattva replied, even if bolts of lightning, battle axes, spears, and arrows were to rain upon me, and if molten iron, blazing like a fork of lightning, and an erupting volcano were to drop on my head, I would never want to be a householder again. At this moment, the gods who were watching from the sky uttered cries of joy and rained down flowers, exclaiming, what a mind not attached to any object, and with compassion and with love for sentient beings. May you, the one with supreme intelligence, be victorious. You are the protector who grants fearlessness to beings. Like the sky which remains unattached to darkness, dust, smoke, or comets, the mind of the Supreme Being remains unattached. The pure being is unstained by pleasurable objects. So the thing that caught me on this that I wanted to talk about was this householder. To be saying, oh, I don't want to be a householder again. I never want to be a householder again. As if, what's wrong with being a householder? In our own ways, everyone here tonight, we're all householders, and so is it necessary to become liberated to not be a householder? So I just made a note here. It says, we are ordinary beings caught in our own web of 3 or 5 poisons, whatever that, however you look at the 3 poisons or the 5 poisons. And we've created this web for ourselves, our lives. And I say, oh, to be a drop, being a householder. Oh, be drop, being a householder. And it's like choosing our matter. It's like choosing, our body, choosing who we are. It's like pure energy, choosing which way it's going to manifest. And so the question then for me becomes, well, what do we do now? What is tomorrow? Tomorrow never comes. The only thing that we can change anything about is right now. So that's the point I wanted to make. And if you want to comment about it, what does it mean to being a householder to you? What do you think about that? And I guess the next question would be, do you want to stop being a householder? If you had the choice, would you stop being a householder in order to become a bodhisattva? So, Alex, let me start with you. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm a householder indeed, although sometimes I don't wish to.
There you
But
go.
uh, we, well, a normal human being, like, want to have their own house. They want to paint the walls the color they like. You know, they want to plant the trees around the house or flowers they like, and fill the house with stuff and keep seeing it, day after day. So yeah, attached to things that sometimes don't really serve as well. Sometimes they do, but oftentimes they don't. And also, it's like distraction. It's like you have to clean the house, you have to, take care of around it. It comes with a lot of chores. So, I mean, it's usually a lot of distraction. Sometimes you don't want those chores really.
Okay.
So, but it's also in a way it's also like it's attached to the way of life. I think it's like if you want to be doing the same thing over and over, you're attached to your own ways. Um, I think one of the Buddha's teachings was like don't stay in one place for too long, like 3 years at most. So I think that also includes, uh, you know, being in one attached to their place, uh, you know, like that particular nature, that particular surrounding, that particular neighborhood, whatever. So there are many things that come with it.
Okay. Thank you. Bernie, would you comment?
Well, householder being a monk, my feeling is that if you're a Western monk these days, more or less you're going to be living out in the community as well. You're going to have a job because nobody's going to support you. So it really doesn't have that great a value given the situation that we have in the West today. If there was if we could change things so that there were monasteries where the monks were supported, that would be great. And in terms of my personal thing, nobody has much use for a 70-year-old monk. So it's I'm at the retirement age, and there's no retirement home for old monks. So I wouldn't be much use as a monk anyway at this stage in my life. If I was younger, perhaps, but right now, no.
Okay. Thank you. Gunga, would you comment?
Yeah. So, I think there's that traditional way of thinking about it is just referring to your occupation, and the Buddha's kind of referring to that in the story, the householder occupation of pursuing a material life, trying to support your family, trying to get ahead, make a profit so that your family and your children are well supported. In contrast to, a spiritual life where you're more focused on spiritual development and reduction of suffering for yourself and others. But I don't see that from my point of view, that householder is more of a perspective that you take on life. So I don't think that just because I have to live in the world and have a job and pay my bills and support my family, I don't think that says that I can't also have a spiritual life. I think the life during the Buddhist time was more clear cut because I think the householders really had to work a lot harder. It was a different kind of work. They had, it was really physical work, and it didn't allow them to be able to engage in the teachings at a level that we're able to gauge at in Western society because we just have a different type of work. We're more educated than the lay people were in the Buddhist time. maybe the education the Buddha had was restricted to people who are wealthy or scholars. But, nowadays in our country, more of us have openness to that level of education. We have a lot more opportunities to study the Dharma just because of the nature of our life, the fact that we're not working, out in the field or at some occupation for 10 hours a day, struggling to keep ourselves warm, to keep our family warm, dealing with all the problems of illness and old age and sickness. We have modern medicine. We have a lot of things, that preventative things we can do. I just think we have a much more leisure time. So I feel like that my ability to be a householder and also have a strong spiritual practice is just much more favorable because of my karma right now. So I don't see that. I see that householder being, householder or spiritual aspirant. That's a title any of us can take on. It really has to do with our focus in our life. We can bring our spiritual practice to our work. I certainly have to bring my spiritual practice to my work in hospice, and the kind of work I do with people. We can bring our spiritual practice into our relationships with our families. We don't have to be self-centered. We can think about others. We can think about the repercussions of our actions. And we can bring our spiritual path to our spiritual path, right? We have the time to meet in groups like this, to read on our own. We don't have to fill up our time with mindless entertainment, watching movies and things. You can use all that free time for spiritual development. So for me, it seems like that the householder in modern times is maybe, are you a materialistic person, who are just, happy to fill your time with pursuits of success, what our material culture says is success. And then, and just a life of sort of uncontrolled suffering when you come up against the fact that you can't fulfill all your desires and you're going to get old and you're going to die. Or are you going to, use a spiritual path, whether it's a Buddhist path or another path, so that you have a more meaningful life? That's sort of how I see it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I disagree with Bernie. I think there's a lot of room there for 7-year-old monks as far as teaching the younger generation about spirituality.
I'm going to hit you with my cane for saying that.
Matt, how about you? What's your comment on this?
I find what everyone's saying really interesting, and gets back to how do these teachings apply to our unique cultural experience. And to, what some people are saying, I don't think the monastic approach to life is really applicable in its traditional sense in our culture. I mean, you could probably go to other places in the world and have that experience, I guess. But I think what makes sense to me, to echo some of what's already been said, and for the idea of the householder, is kind of what is our primary orientation in our life? Is it one of trying to find happiness through experiences in the world, or is it through are we placing our priority and our life energy into a spiritual life? Like and maybe this is some kind of projection I'm doing, but like when I think of you, Lance, in your life currently, I think of that as not a householder life. In the sense that it's like the spiritual practice, and I guess on the surface it is, but the spiritual practice, that orientation seems to be the main thrust of your life, the organizing principle of your life. That's kind of how I would think about it or differentiate it. But I think it's a very interesting conversation of what does this mean in our own context.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. There's a couple ways of looking at this. The way I look at it is, one is, in some of the traditions and some of the lineages, a householder, is someone who can be a very holy person. And they can be a teacher, a Dharma teacher and so on like that, but they have a family and so on. And then there's lots of monastic and some traditions where someone goes through the whole monastic process, and at some stage in their life, maybe they're 20, 30, or 40 or 50 years old, they give up their robes and they become, they continue to be a holy person, but they have a family. They have a household in which to take responsibility for and so on like that. And it becomes, I'm sure, part of their Dharma work and so on. So I look at, the other side of this is I look at the being a Nagpa or being a householder. We wouldn't, on the path of being a bodhisattva, we wouldn't want that to be an obstacle for us. But yet it becomes a part of the stepping stones. Maybe it's like that, like we have to go through the different realms of we need at some point to have been in the hell realm. We need at some point to be in the hungry ghost realm, at some point to be in the animal realm. That we've gone through each of those stages to be able to get to be and appreciate being a bodhisattva in order to make the choice to remain being a bodhisattva or becoming or letting everything go and becoming a Buddha, ultimately becoming a Buddha, one who has no identity, So, being a universal monarch, being a king is being a householder. He's got a much greater household in which to take care of many more people, but he's bound up by, that web of making choices and so on. So this is where the bodhisattva here in the story, Siddhartha Gautama, is caught, to give that up, being a householder, being a universal monarch, or becoming one who is a spiritual leader that is beyond anything that can be imagined. Nobody else really knows what this is. It's only he who knows what this is, what's really involved and so on. So this is where he's on that leading edge to make that go, and to, how do we prepare for that? And do we, I've asked a couple of lamas over the years, in my naivete years ago, I would say, well, what do you want to be reborn as? And, I would get different answers and so on. And I think the right answer is, I don't know. It's going to be, there's a lot of things that are happening that we can't always recognize, even as a bodhisattva being on the path and so on. So there's things that may have not percolated up that we need to deal with and so on. But I think at any point, it seems that we all want to be liberated. We all want to be free. That's the essence of what we all want to be. And so whatever that means to be that, that's what we'll be. If we truly want that, that's our aspiration. Whatever we need to do to facilitate that, that's what we'll do. That's how I look at it.
And I wanted to add that, just because someone leaves and joins a monastery doesn't mean they don't still have that householder mentality right into the monastery with them. They just bring their ego to the new space, and, just changing your environment like that doesn't necessarily get rid of all your attachments. That spiritual change has to be something that goes on internally. It's not just going to be effective because you decide to take a vow to be a monk. It's not going to fix you. Yes.
Yeah, I understand that point, and that's a good point. I think we could talk another half hour on that. Well, so I'll bring it up because it is an interesting point. It has to do with aspiration. It has to do with motivation. Do we want to be a householder? If we had a choice, and we do, what do we want tomorrow to be? What do we want today to be? What do we want next year to be? And so on. And we are, the only ones who can really control that. All right. So we start tonight with 15.100. So if we can read these one page at a time like we've been doing. We can get this in. Each page these verses are relatively short, so it won't be a big deal to be able to do this. So let me start. Bernie, if you will start with 15.100.
Okay.
And then next after that, Matt, will you pick it up after that, the next page? And then Alex, if you will go to the next page, you be the third reader. And then Kunga, if you'll be the fourth reader. And then I'll be the fifth, and we'll continue that order of things until we finish this chapter. Okay. So if you have notes that you want to take, things that you want to bring up, if you got a pencil or a pen, you want to make a note, that's fine. And the one thing I do ask is if we read this, if we recite this as if we were reciting it to young children, when we speed read it through, for myself anyway, I find it hard to follow, so and plus I think it loses one of the beauties of the English language, I think, is that you can inject a meaning in the meter in which you recite these things. If it's done all one monotone way like they do in Sanskrit, I always find that not as pleasing as the English. We could have a talk about that sometime. So Bernie, when you're ready.
Okay. Monks, when the gods Shantamati and Lalitavistara understood the Bodhisattva's determination, they caused all men, women, and children in the city of Kapalivastu to fall asleep. They made everything plunge into a deep silence. Monks, at that moment, the Bodhisattva realized that everyone in the city was sound asleep, that the hour of midnight had come, and that the moon was in the constellation of Pushya, the king of constellations. He was aware that right then the time had come for him to leave home. So he said to his servant, Chanda, don't badger me for now. Instead, without any further delay, bring me my horse Kantaka well adorned. As soon as the Bodhisattva uttered these words, the four great kings left their residences. They had listened to the Bodhisattva's words and had prepared to make offerings to him. Now they hurried quickly to the city of Kapilavastu. King Dhritarashtra, lord of the Gandharvas, arrived from the east together with several trillion kinnaras playing various instruments and singing songs. As soon as Dhritarashtra arrived, he began to circumambulate the city of Kapilavastu. Stopping in the east from where he had arrived, he paid homage to the Bodhisattva. The great king Virudaka arrived from the south with several trillion kumbhandas, holding in their hands various pearl necklaces. In addition, they carried various precious gems and vases filled with different types of perfume. As soon as Virudaka arrived, he also began to circumambulate the city of Kapilavastu. Stopping in the south from where he had arrived, he paid homage to the Bodhisattva. The great king Virupaksha arrived from the west with several trillion nagas, holding their hands various necklaces made of pearls and different types of precious gems. They sent forth a gentle breeze from a rain of flowers and perfumed powders that emitted beautiful scents. When Virupaksha arrived, he also circumambulated the city of Kapilavastu, stopping in the west where he had arrived. He paid homage to the Bodhisattva. The great king Kubera arrived from the north with several trillion yakshas holding in their hands precious jewels of the type called starlight. They also carried oil lamps and lighted lanterns. They held in their hands various weapons such as bows and arrows, swords, spears, lances with 2 and 3 points, discuses, one-pointed pikes, and javelins, and they were armed with a strong armor and helmets. When Kubera arrived, he also began to circumambulate the city of Kapilavastu. Then he settled in the northern direction from where he had arrived and paid homage to the Bodhisattva.
Thereafter, Sakra, Lord of the Gods, arrived together with the gods from the heaven of the 33, bringing divine flowers, perfumes, garlands, ointments, scented powders, garments, parasols, victory banners, flags, earrings, and adornments. When he arrived there, he began to circumambulate the city of Kapilavastu. Then he settled together with his retinue in the space above, in the same direction from which he had come, and began to pay homage to the Bodhisattva. Monks, when Shanda heard the Bodhisattva's words, his eyes became filled with tears, and he said, Lord, you know the right time, the right moment, and the right occasion. However, this is not the right time and not the right occasion to leave. So why did you give me the order for leaving? The Bodhisattva replied, Shanda, the time has come. Then Shanda asked, the time for what, my lord? The Bodhisattva replied, a long time ago, while seeking to benefit beings, I made the wish to liberate the world. Once I attained the state of awakening beyond old age or death, now that time has come. On this topic it is said, at the time when the Supreme Being departed, all the gods were eager to present offerings. All protector gods of heaven and earth came, as did Sakra, Lord of the gods, along with his following. The gods of the heaven free from strife, the heaven of joy, and the heaven of delighting in emanations, and the gods of the heaven of making use of others' emanations all came. So did the Naga king Varuna, Manasvin, Anavapta, as well as Sagara. The gods in the form realm also came, those who always experienced the peace of concentration. They were in a hurry to make offerings to the Supreme Being, who was worthy of honor in all the 3 realms. Also the Bodhisattvas, who were his companions in past actions, gathered there from all 10 directions, saying, let us see the departure of the victorious one, and make offerings to him in an appropriate manner.
Okay. The great being who is Lord of Gahyakas, Pradiptavajra, positioned himself in the sky above. Wearing armor, strong, brave, and energetic, he held a blazing Vajra in his hand. Surya and Chandra, these 2 gods, came to stand to his right and left. They joined their palms together and reflected on the Bodhisattva's departure. Constellation Pushya, as well, with his retinue, transformed his body in a majestic way and stood before the noblest of men. With a delightful voice he spoke. Now that Pushya is present, this is the perfect time to leave. Tonight, all your victorious and auspicious prayers will be fulfilled. I will accompany you. As you make an end to desire, may you encounter no obstacles. You have been encouraged by the god Sankodaka. Now swiftly manifest your strength and courage, and liberate all beings who are oppressed by misery. Now is the right time for you to leave. Billions of gods have gathered, and let a rain of ravishing flowers fall down. The Bodhisattva, for his part, sat there in a perfect cross-legged posture, surrounded by gods. He was so beautiful, blazing with splendor. In the city, all men, women, and children became tired and fell asleep, abandoning their chores. The horses, elephants, oxen, parrots, cranes, peacocks, and minas became tired and quickly slept, not noticing anything. Armed with lances, Kardasvaja, and mounted on elephants, horses, and chariots, the Sakya youths who kept guard also fell asleep, as did the king, the princess, and the royal pages. The retinue of consorts, completely naked, were asleep and oblivious. As midnight arrived, the Bodhisattva spoke to Chanda in a voice captivating like Brahma's and sweet as a nightingale. Chanda, bring Kantaka, well adorned and well groomed.
Finish the next line, please.
Do not create obstacles and do not hesitate if you have any affection for me.
Chanda's eyes filled with tears as he spoke to his master. Great charioteer, where will you go? What do you need the horse for? You know the right time and moment, and this is not the time to practice the Dharma. The gates are shut and firmly bolted, so who will open them for you? Right then, Sakra opened the gate merely by the power of his mind. Chanda was thrilled at the sight, yet also sad and on the verge of tears. Oh no, what shall I do now? Who can help? To whom should I turn? Sakra will only listen to the one with such invincible power. What use is this powerful army with its 4 divisions? The king, the princess, and the royal pages, none of them know what the Bodhisattva is doing. Yasavati and the retinue of consorts are in their beds, lulled to sleep by the gods. Alas, he is leaving. The vow he made in the past is now being fulfilled. Right then, billions of overjoyed gods spoke to Chanda. Chanda, bring him the excellent horse, Kantaka. Do not disappoint our guide. The gods and demigods played their millions of drums and instruments, and still the supreme city the gods have put to sleep does not awake. Chanda, look to the pure sky where the divine light shone so beautifully. Look at the millions of assembled bodhisattvas making offerings. Look at glorious Sakra, Saki's husband, who is at the gates with his army. Look at the gods, demigods, and kanaras who are here making offerings. Chanda heard the god and told the horse Kantaka, you must neigh now, because here comes the supreme charioteer of beings. Then he adorned the horse's jasmine-colored hoofs with gold. Distressed and weeping, he gave the horse to he who is an ocean of qualities, saying, you with noble marks who benefit others, here is your horse of virtuous pedigree. May all your past aspirations become fulfilled. Please proceed. May all obstacles be pacified and your desired disciplined conduct be accomplished. May you grant all beings happiness, a rebirth in the higher realms, and peace.
When the Bodhisattva rose from his seat, the earth shook in 6 ways. He mounted the supreme king of horses that resembled the full moon. The guardians, with their pure lotus-like hands, then lifted up the supreme horse. Sakra and Brahma went into the front, showing the way. The pure and bright light set forth by the Bodhisattva illumined the earth. The lower realms were pacified, and all beings were happy and free from afflictions. A rain of flowers fell, millions of instruments sounded, and gods and demigods rejoiced. All of them circumambulated the city and departed, filled with delight. Since the great being was leaving, the deity of the best of cities came, feeling depressed, appearing before the Bodhisattva. The deity spoke to his lotus face, feeling miserable and dejected. If you leave, the city will become disturbed and steeped in darkness. If tonight you abandon your palace, there will be no joy and no happiness for me. No longer will I hear the singing of the birds, or the sweet sound of the flute in the female quarters, or the sound of songs with propitious lyrics, which you, one of infinite fame, used to hear on waking up. No longer will I behold the assembly of divine siddhas, who make offerings to you day and night, nor will I be able to smell any longer the divine scents, if you, who conquers emotions, abandons this palace tonight. This palace, if abandoned by you, will be like a withered and used garland. It will seem like an empty stage. When you are gone, all magnificence and splendor will disappear. You will take away the vitality and power from this entire city. Like a wasteland, it will shine with beauty no more. Today, disproved are the sages' prophecies that you will be a universal monarch on earth.
The might of the Sakyas of the earth will come to nothing, and the royal family line will be interrupted. The hope of the assembly of Shakyas will be dashed entirely if you, the great tree of merit, depart. Immaculate one, faultless one, let me go with you, wherever you wish to depart for, yet please engender love and compassion, and take one more look at this palace. The intelligent one looked at the palace and spoke in the sweetest voice. Until I have made an end to birth and death, I will not return to the city of Kapilavastu. Until I have attained precious awakening, the supreme level of immortality beyond old age and dying, I will not turn my face toward Kapilavastu, whether I am standing, sitting, lying down, or walking. When the Bodhisattva, the Lord of Beings, departed, the celestial maidens traveling through the sky began to sing his praise. He is the marvelous object of offerings in the great field of merit, the field for those wishing for merit, and the giver of the fruit of immortality. Out of compassion for sentient beings, he has throughout the 10 million eons trained in generosity, self-control, restraint, and thus attained awakening. His discipline is pure, his conduct excellent, and his practice undiminished. He did not pursue pleasures and enjoyments, but observed discipline. He always spoke patiently to protect others. Even when his limbs were cut off, he was never angry or hostile. Constantly diligent for millions of eons, he never felt disheartened. Thus he awakened and performed millions of sacrifices. Always in meditative concentration, his mind has become calm and tranquil. Since he has burned away all emotions, he will liberate millions of beings. He possesses unobstructed knowledge and is free from conceptual thinking. With a mind free from conceptuality, he will become a self-arising victor. His mind is always suffused with love, and his compassion is complete. He possesses joy, equanimity, concentration, and knows the four immeasurables. He is the supreme God of gods, worthy of all gods' worship. With his pure, stainless, and sublime mind, he perfected millions of qualities.
He is a refuge for the frightened and a lamp for the blind. He is a place of rest for the persecuted and a physician for those long sick. He is like a king, a righteous king, like Sakra with 1,000 eyes, like the self-arisen Brahma, pure in body and mind. He is firm with abundant knowledge, diligent and detached. He is a hero because he destroyed the afflictions. Undefeated, he conquers all enemies. He is fearless like a lion and gentle like an elephant. He is the leader of the herd like a perfect bull, always patient and without anger. He is bright like the moon and illuminating like the sun. He shines like a torch and glows like a star. He is unstained like a lotus, and his discipline smells sweet like a flower. This teacher is immovable like Mount Meru and provides sustenance like the earth. He is unshakable like an ocean. He has defeated the demon of the afflictions and the demon of the aggregates. He has defeated the demon of death and the demon of the god. He is the great leader who soon will teach the supreme eightfold path of the noble ones, those who are established in wrong paths. Free from the darkness of ignorance, he destroys old age, death, and afflictions. He will become the self-arisen victor, famous on earth and in heaven. In the form of a supreme being, he is praised in infinite ways. Through the merit of praising you, may we become like you, the lion of speech. Monks, once the Bodhisattva left his home, he crossed over the lands of the Sakyas, the Kaudyas, and the Mallas. When day broke, he had arrived 6 leagues away from the town of Anumaynaya in the country of Mainaya. There he dismounted from his horse, Kantaka, and once he was on the ground, he dismissed the great assembly of gods, Nagas, Yaksas, Gandharvas, demigods, Garudas, Kinnaras, and Maharagas. Then he thought to himself, I should entrust these ornaments and the horse Kantaka to Shanda and then send him back. So he summoned Shanda and told him, Shanda, you should go back now. Take these ornaments and my horse Kantaka and return to the palace. At the place where Shanda left the Bodhisattva in order to return home, a memorial was later built. This memorial is still known today as Shanda's return.
The Bodhisattva then thought to himself, with my hair this long, I cannot be a monk. So he took his sword, cut off his hair, and then cast it into the air. The gods in the heaven of the 33 collected the hair for worship. Even to this day, the gods of the heavens of the 33 celebrate this event during the hair festival. At this very place, another memorial was built, which today is still known as the receipt of the hair. Again, Bodhisattvas considered, if I'm to be a monk, it would not be right to wear silken garments. So it would be good if I could find some clothes suitable for living in the forest. The gods of the pure realms then thought, the Bodhisattva needs saffron-colored robes. Immediately, a god left and manifested in front of the Bodhisattva in the form of the hunter wearing saffron-colored cloth. The Bodhisattva asked the god, my friend, would you give me your saffron-colored robes? Then I will give you my silken garments. The god replied, your clothes already suit you well, and I'm happy with what I wear. But Bodhisattva insisted, please, I beg you. The god, still in the shape of a hunter, then gave his saffron-colored clothes to the Bodhisattva, while he himself took the Bodhisattva's silken garments. Because the god was overcome with devotion to the Bodhisattva, he touched the garments to his head, holding them with both of his hands. He then returned to the celestial world in order to render offerings and veneration for the garments there. Chanda had witnessed the exchange of the clothes, and later a memorial was erected at the site. This memorial is still known today as the memorial of receiving the saffron-colored cloth. When the Bodhisattva cut off his hair and put on the saffron-colored cloth, 100,000 gods felt joyous, pleased, and elated. Happy and delighted, they called out cries of joy and exclaimed, friends, Prince Siddhartha has left his home. Friends, Prince Siddhartha has become a monk. He will awaken to the unexcelled, perfect, and complete Buddhahood, and will turn the wheel of the Dharma. He will liberate from the birth the infinite number of beings who are born. Then he will free them from old age, death, sickness, pain, lamentation, suffering, depression, and distress, and ferry them to the other shore of the ocean of samsara. He will establish them in the realm of phenomena, which is blissful, peaceful, deathless, and free from fears, suffering, harm, and stain. These words of amazement, delight, and joy resounded all the way up to the highest heaven.
When the retinue of consorts did not see the young prince, they began to search for him in the spring, summer, and winter palaces, and in his private rooms and apartments. Unable to find him, they all began to wail like fish hawks. The ladies were overcome by extreme grief, and some cried out, "My son!" Others called out, "My brother, my husband, my lord, and my master." Some mumbled different tender words, while others contorted their bodies in various ways and wept. Some of the ladies plucked their hair, while others faced each other and sobbed. Some cried with rolling eyes, and others shed tears, wiping their faces with their garments. Some slapped their thighs with their hands, and others beat their chests. Some slapped their arms with their hands, and others beat their heads. Some covered their heads with dust and wept, crying out loud. Some ladies were seen disheveled, their hair, others seen disheveling their hair, others pulling it out. Some raised their arms and lamented loudly. Some ran headlong like gazelles pierced by poisonous arrows, all the while crying. Some among them staggered about like a plantain tree shaken by the wind and sobbed. Others tossed their bodies around on the floor as if they were just about to die, while some writhed on the ground as if they were fish pulled from the water and cried. Others collapsed suddenly on the ground like a tree that has been cut from its root and wept. When the king heard these noises, he asked his fellow Sakyas, "What is this loud noise coming from the ladies' apartments?" The Sakyas looked into the matter and replied, "Your Majesty, the young prince is not in the ladies' apartments." Then the king ordered, "Quickly close the city gates. Let us search for the prince within the gates." But the prince was nowhere to be found, whether inside or outside the gates. Mahaprajnapati Gautami collapsed on the ground, lamenting, and said to King Saradhana, "Your Majesty, get my son back quickly." The king sent messengers on horseback into the 4 directions with the order, "Go and do not come back until you have found the prince." Since those who can read signs in the future
No, my turn.
Oh, sorry.
Since those who can read signs in the future had prophesied that the Bodhisattva would leave through the gate of auspiciousness, the messengers proceeded to this gate. There they saw that a rain of flowers had fallen on the road, and they thought, "He must have left this way." When they had traveled a little bit further, they met the god who was carrying the Bodhisattva's silken garments on his head. Again they thought, "These are the silken garments of the prince. Can it be that he has been killed for their sake? And get hold of this man." However, right then they saw Chandra trailing behind the god, leading the horse Kantaka and carrying the Bodhisattva's ornaments. So they said, "Here comes Chandra with Kantaka. Let us not act rashly, but instead question him first." So they asked him, "Chandra, did the man kill the priest for the sake of his silken garments?" Chandra said, "No, not at all. This person offered the prince his own saffron-colored clothes, and the prince in return gave him these silken garments. That god then placed the garments on top of his head and returned right then to his celestial realm in order to venerate them." The men questioned Chandra further. "What do you think, Chandra? Should we go on after the prince? Will we be able to make him return?" Chandra said, "No, you will not be able to do so. The young prince is so diligent, disciplined, and steadfast. He said that unless he awakens to perfect and complete Buddhahood, he will never again enter the city of Kapilavastu, and he will not return with you. What the prince said will happen is in fact what will happen. And why will the prince not return? Because his enthusiasm, discipline, and steadfastness." Then Chandra took the horse Kantaka and the ornaments and went to the inner quarters. 3 young Sakyas called Bandrika, Mahanama, and Aniruddha tried for a long time to lift the ornaments, but they were unable to. These ornaments were made for someone with a body as strong as Narayana, and so other people were not able to wear them. When Mahaprajapati Gautama saw that nobody could move the ornaments, she thought, when I see his ornaments lying there, my heart is pierced with pain. I think it is better, therefore, to throw the ornaments into the pond. So she let the ornaments be thrown into the pond, and even to this day, that lake is called the Lake of the Ornaments. On this topic, it is said, when the wise and courageous Bodhisattva departed from his home, the entire city of Kapilavastu awoke from its sleep. Everyone thought that the young prince was still asleep in his bed. Seeing one another, they felt content.
When Gopa and the assembly of consorts awoke, they looked at his bed but did not find the Bodhisattva there. They let out cries that reached the king's quarters. Alas, we have been deceived. Where did the Bodhisattva go? When the king heard that, he collapsed to the ground. He wept and cried, "Oh no, my only son." Many hundreds of Shakyas tried to revive him, sprinkling water from vases on him as he lay motionless. Gopa had also fallen off her bed and onto the ground. She cut her hair and took off her jewelry. She exclaimed, "Before long we must separate from those we love." The guide of beings told me that he made me so perfectly aware of this. Your form is so beautiful. Your faultless limbs are perfect, so perfect and pure. All beings cherish you. Praised as he who brings good fortune, you are honored in heaven and on earth. When you left my bed, where did you go? Until I see the Bodhisattva with all his good qualities again, I will not drink water, nor mead or liquor. I shall sleep on the ground and wear my matted hair in a topknot. Without bathing, I shall practice disciplined conduct and austerities. In all the parks, the leaves, flowers, and fruits are gone. The brilliant white necklaces of pearls have faded and collected dust. Since the most noble being has left this fine city, the palace has its beauty and the city has become like the palace has lost its beauty and the city has become like a desert. Alas, the delightful singing voices. Alas, the assembly of consorts with fine jewelry. Alas, the spaces covered with golden nets. All this shall I see no more without him who is full of qualities. The maternal aunt, who also felt miserable, tried to console her, saying, "Daughter of the Shakyas, do not cry. The Supreme Noble One among men has said in the past, I will liberate the world from birth and old age. The great sage who is well trained in thousands of virtues traveled 6 leagues during the remainder of the night. He gave his fine horse and his ornaments to Chanda and said, Chanda, take these and return to the city of Kapilavastu."
Repeat the following to my parents. The young prince is left. Please do not be saddened. When he attains awakening, he will return. Then you will listen to the Dharma and find peace. Shana began to weep and spoke again to the guide. Your kinfolk, the best of people, may beat me and ask, Shanda, where have you taken the virtuous Bodhisattva? But I have no ability, fortitude, and strength. The Bodhisattva replied, Shanda, do not be afraid. My kinfolk will be happy to see you again. They will always regard you as their teacher and love you in the same way as they love me. Bringing the finest of horses and the ornaments, Shanda returned to the park of the noble one among men. The guard at the park, overjoyed upon seeing them, speedily conveyed the happy news to the Sakyas. The prince, the noble horse, as well as Shanda, have returned to the park, so don't worry anymore. When the king, who was surrounded by the retinue of the Sakyas, heard this, he became exhilarated and quickly went to the park. But Gopa, knowing the intelligence of and steadfastness of the Bodhisattva, was not thrilled and did not trust these words. She thought, "It is wrong to assume that the prince returned here before having attained awakening." When the king saw only the horse, Kantaka, and Shanda, he cried out and collapsed on the ground. "Alas, my son, so talented in playing music and singing songs, where have you gone, abandoning this kingdom?" Shanda now explained to me truly, right here, where did the Bodhisattva go, and what are his plans? Who opened the gate for him, and who led him away? How did the gods make offerings to him? Shanda replied, "Powerful king, listen to me. At night, when the old and young in this city were deeply asleep, the Bodhisattva told me in a soft and gentle voice, 'Shanda, quickly bring me the king of horses.'"
I guess it's me. I tried wake up the assembly of men and ladies, but they were so sound asleep that they did not hear any words. With tears, I had to bring him the king of all horses. I then told him, "Benefactor of beings, go wherever you please." Chakra opened the gates that were fitted with a lock. Guardians of the world tightly held the horse's hoofs. When the hero mounted the horse, the Trichilocosm shook. The road on which he traveled through the sky was very broad indeed. A bright light appeared, which dispelled the pitch-black darkness. Flowers fell, and the sound of hundreds of musical instruments was heard. The gods and goddesses offered him praises, as he moved through the sky surrounded by a celestial retinue. Then Chanda took the noble horse and the ornaments with him and went into the ladies' quarters weeping. When Gopa saw Chanda and the noble horse, she fainted and collapsed on the ground. Startled, the large gathering of women brought water, washed her, and called out, "May our Sakya princess not die now. It would be too much to bear if we lost two loved ones." The dejected princess of the Sakyas gathered her strength and embraced the neck of the noble king of horses. Recalling the games of love from the past, she was overcome by sorrow and cried out, "Alas, you gave me joy. Alas, noble man whose face is like the spotless moon. Alas, my most noble of men. Alas, you with excellent marks, so stainless and splendid. Alas, my well-born man with a perfect body, well-formed and tapering, you are unequaled. Alas, my lords full of supreme qualities, venerated by humans and gods alike, and full of great compassion. Alas, my powerful man, who is as strong as Narayana. You conquer the hordes of demons. Alas, my gentle love, with a voice as sweet as Brahma's, and as soft as the sound of a nightingale.
Alas, my man of limitless renown, you have emerged from hundreds of virtues and have stainless merit. Alas, you are my love with glory beyond limits. Adorned with good qualities, you delight the sages. Alas, my handsome love, who was born in the sublime forest Lamini, which resounds with the buzzing of bees. Alas, my dear one, renowned in heaven and on earth, you who are a revered tree of wisdom. Alas, my sweet-tasting man, with lips like a bimba fruit, with eyes like a lotus and skin of golden hue. Alas, my dear one, with spotless teeth, as white as cow's milk or snow. Alas, my dear one, with a beautiful nose, beautiful eyebrows, and a stainless circling hair between your brows. Alas, my dear one, with shoulders so well formed, with a waist like a bow, legs like a deer, and rounded hips. Alas, my man with thighs like the trunk of an elephant, with fair hands and feet, and with copper-colored nails. All those beautiful attributes were formed by your merit and delighted the king. Alas, you were my melodious song and music, and a balm obtained from exquisite flowers in the best of seasons. Alas, you were to me the scent of flowers. You brought delight to the retinue of consorts with song and music. Alas, fine Kanthaka, my husband's companion, where did you carry him? Alas, Chanda, don't you have any compassion? Why did you not wake us when the best of men was leaving? Today, the compassionate guide of those who need guidance has left this noble city. Why did you tell us that our benefactor was leaving? Why did you not tell us that our benefactor was leaving? How did our benefactor leave? Who helped him escape from the capital? In which direction has he gone? Fortunate are the deities of the forest grove who are now his companion.
Chanda, I am miserable, for I have been showed a treasure. Yet now, since it is like my eyes have been gouged, restore my sight. Chanda, the victorious ones always teach that one's parents are to be honored. If he abandoned them, needless to mention that he would leave the pleasure of love with a woman. I'll repeat that. If he abandoned them, needless to mention that he would leave the pleasures of love with a woman. Alas, to separate from those we love is like watching a play. Nothing endures. Because of grasping at concepts, childish beings hold mistaken views. This is why they have to take birth and die. In the past, he taught that all who are conditioned by birth and death have no friends whatsoever. So may his wishes be fulfilled, and may he, under the best of trees, attain supreme and noble awakening. When he has attained stainless awakening, may he return to this noble city. When Chanda heard Gopa's words, he felt deeply unhappy. He said in a voice choked with tears, "Gopa, listen to my words." Around midnight, when the gathering of ladies were deeply asleep, secretly, the one elevated with hundreds of merits told me to bring his horse Kantaka. When I heard his words, I immediately looked at you, asleep on your bed, and I shouted aloud to you, "Gopa, your beloved is about to leave. Get up." But the gods blocked my words, and so now not even one lady awoke. Weeping, I adorned the king of horses and gave it to the most exalted among men. Kantaka then neighed with his fierce energy, and although the sound could be heard for a mile, nobody in our fine city heard it, having been lulled to sleep by the gods.
As the hoofs of Kantaka, covered with gold, silver, and precious gems, struck the earth gave off a terrible and beautiful sound, and yet nobody could hear it. At that time, the constellation of Pusha had arisen, and the moon and the stars were shining in the sky. From the sky, tens of millions of gods folded their hands, bowed to him, and offered prostrations. With the assembly of yakshas and rakshasas in attendance, the four guardians of the world, who possessed great magical power, lifted the hooves of Kantaka with their hands that were as spotless and pure as the anthers of a lotus flower. The Lord, elevated with the hundreds of merits, mounted the horse and resembled a red lotus and a jasmine flower. At that time, the earth shook in 6 different ways, and the Buddha realms were pervaded with stainless light. Then the god Shakya, the husband of Shachi, I guess, and the principal of all gods, opened the gates. 100 million gods preceded the Bodhisattva, and the Nagas and gods offered him their venerations as he left. The noble Kantaka, at a mere sign, carried the protector of this world across the sky. Gatherings of gods and demigods, along with Chakra, escorted the well-gone one as he was leaving. The goddesses, so skilled in playing music, praised the qualities of the Bodhisattva. They all gave Kantaka strength as they sang to him the most full and touching way. Kantaka, carry the guide of this world. Be swift and don't feel sad. When you assist the protector of this world, you are free from the dangers of the lower realms and difficult rebirths. Each of the gods expressed this desire, saying, I also want to carry the guide of this world. That there was not a place to be found, not walked upon by the millions of gods who said,
Kantaka, look at the path prepared for you in the sky. It is so bright and beautiful. Its bejeweled ledges are ornamented in various ways, and it is censed with divine incense based on supreme essences. Kantaka, because of your meritorious deed, you will be magically reborn in the heaven of the 33. As divine maidens surround you and attend to you, you will delight in divine sense pleasures. Gopa, do not shed any more tears. Be happy and rejoice. Before long, you will witness the best among men attain awakening. You will see him honored and served by the immortals. Gopa, one should never shed tears over people who do such excellent deeds. Instead, rejoice in he who is elevated by hundreds of splendors of merits, and do not weep anymore. Gopa, even if I were to speak for 7 days about the offerings that humans and gods arranged at the time of our king's departure from home, I would not be able to cover it all. You have served and paid respect to the one who benefits beings. Thus you will find supreme and inconceivable attainment. I believe that you shall become just like him, the most noble being. This concludes the 15th chapter on leaving home.
Very good. Thank you. So let's all take a turn at talking about this part of the chapter. Gunga, how would you summarize this? What are your comments about this?
He finally left home. That's my summary. Well, it's a quite a long elaboration on what I've heard in a much simpler version, and where basically the prince woke up one day, one evening, and looked around at all his courtesans who were scattered about in disarray, and realized, that even they who were beautiful at one time were going to become, old age, sickness, and permanence would also affect them as well, and decided that he really needed to go out and find a deeper level of meaning to his life. Yeah, I don't know. It's quite an expansion on the story. I don't know where to go with that.
Okay, well, we can come back and talk more about that. Alex, what do you think? How would you summarize this part of the chapter?
Well, it's striking. It's striking in it. Like I also heard the abbreviated version of this, of course, and but I never suspected that all his retinue and people like were so attached to him, um, and overcome by all these sorrows and griefs, and no wonder they didn't want him to live, and that gives like a little bit different twist to the story, that he of course knew how much other people attached to him, or fascinated by him, or put a lot of hopes in him to continue the Sakya clan lineage, and to like have somebody to admire and somebody to venerate. And suddenly that person, the who is a point of their hopes and desires and aspirations. Suddenly that person is gone, and they don't know even where he went to, and they don't know where he's coming back. So yeah, I mean, and this is kind of course, probably a kind of a lesson for anybody, like family members, friends of somebody who is becoming a monk and want to, leave our household wife and life. that that will happen to the Buddha. That would also happen to everybody, around such a person who want to become a monk. So yes, and maybe it is also a little bit kind of consolate, maybe like a story that in comparison to those people, like maybe it helps to endure those pains of attachment when somebody leaves, house to become a monk, because it's probably not as great loss as those people felt at the time, because he was so perfect and because he had so much potential and hopes to fulfill it. So yeah, that's all I want to say without
Good.
being
Thank you.
too much.
Matt, how about you? Would you comment?
I guess for me, just trying to think what are the parallels I can find in my own life, or how could I relate to it to my own experience, and to that aim, I think the something in the idea of other people kind of wanting a more worldly life for me, maybe, or but like in this kind of, though, in like with the best of intentions, not like some kind of live this materialistic Mara kind of thing or something like that, of of what other people see as like, this is what happiness would look like, this is what a fulfilled life would look like for someone that's in this more worldly sense. So it's kind of like pushing towards that out of a sense of of caring or something, not coming from a bad place. So I think, I don't know, that's what it was making me think of, and then that kind of having to chart one's own course even in the midst of that.
Okay. Thank you. Bernie, how about you?
Well, it's a well-known story. It's just been elaborated on a lot. And so that in the way most of the stories of the Buddha's life have been elaborated on in this text, the idea that the Buddha left home, I mean, going back to the original story, he left home because he was confronted with the paradox of the pleasures of life being temporary, and he wanted to resolve that problem. At least that's the way I look at it. And everything is going to have its end because life is short ultimately. And he wanted to find something that was of greater value than anything you can find in this life, and find and confront the issues of life and death, which all of us face, no matter what religion or philosophy we believe in. It's an existential issue, if I am using that word correctly. And so the kernel of the story is basically there, and it's basically that somebody who was sensitive to the real problems of life decided to do something about it rather than just to sit and mope about it, or just turn away from the issue because no one can solve it. So it's in a certain sense, it's intelligence. It's also heroism, And it's also a clear vision of what needs to be solved. It's what took Buddha or the Bodhisattva to become a not quite monk yet, but a yogi. So that's the kernel of the story.
Yeah, thank you. My observation is that in this section of the story, the Bodhisattva barely said anything. He was very, very resolute. All the stuff that came before this in this chapter was his, explaining his motivation and so on. So this was very emotional reactions by all the different people that were in the palace that touched his life or that were touched by him and so on, and how they were dealing with his leaving. And not the least of which was Shanda, who was feeling quite guilty, and he had to explain himself a couple different times, and I think he was kind of explaining it to himself. That's the way I think that I would have thought about it. I keep talking because I got to keep explaining it. I got to find the rationale. He told me to do this. I had to do this, and so when it wasn't my doing, I didn't want him to go and all that. So Shanda was really trying to deal with that. And many of the stories that we heard, before reading this, was that the king, Shuddhadana, had issued a proclamation that anybody who tried to aid the Bodhisattva in leaving the palace was to have their head chopped off. Many of the other stories were much more dramatic in a way that their lives were at risk if they were to go against the king's wishes, and the king's wish was to keep Siddhartha Gautama as the prince and to become king and so on. So this one here is much more flowery, much more beautiful, much more, in keeping with the idea that there was this prophecy of his being a great spiritual being, and the king was not standing in his way. And he was allowing this to manifest, and he would rationalize it to the rest of his Sakya family and so on. So it was the gods there was a lot of speech by the gods who were comforting, not just Shanda, but even the horse, Kantaka, comforting them, saying, oh, you're going to be reborn, in this magnificent way, and so on like that. So it's a very beautiful piece, but it's a very sentimental piece, I think. This section of this chapter and everything is very sentimental and very with emotion and so on. And maybe that's part of, the thing. The only one who was not emotional about this was the Bodhisattva. And to show that, he had transcended all this emotional stuff, he kind of overcame that a long time ago. He knew that this was his life's work and what he needed to do. So he didn't have any emotional attachments to this whole process. Anybody else like to comment some more, or in relation to the other parts of the story that we've already read?
I wanted to comment on the getting the saffron colored robe from the hunter. I had
Okay.
heard that idea before as well. Then the idea, what I heard or read before was that he encountered a hunter in the woods who was dressed up as a monk because that was helping him to hunt the animals, because the animals were used to monks being there and being non-harming. So the hunter was there in disguise because then he could get closer to the animals. And so when the Bodhisattva changes clothes with him, he's also, helping that hunter move out of that unskillful way of living, killing animals and just killing by deception as pretending to be a spiritual aspirant. So I thought that was interesting. They had that in there.
What tradition story did that come from, would you say?
Oh, I don't know. I've probably only read, you know, that story has been passed down through Western Buddhist tradition. So like not specifically Zen or anything, probably through just Western stories of the Buddha's life, just I'm not sure which sutra that talks about besides this one of the him encountering a hunter dressed as a monk in disguise.
I see. Well, that's interesting, yeah. Because that's the first time I've heard, I had read about the saffron robes. I thought it was interesting. There was just a couple line mention of his hair. And in other stories, his cutting, he had a long ponytail that was indicative of, his rank as being a prince or something like that. His holy, his princely hair, and that cutting that was a big deal, and that his Shanda, his attendant, knew that was like a final step. He really meant business when he cut that off, and that the Bodhisattva gave it to him and said, "Here, give this to my father," so that he knew how resolute I was in this decision and so on. So that's something that I heard in other stories. In this, it was barely a mention. And the other thing was that there was no mention of Rahula, his son. Gopa
Yeah, I
didn't have
also
any
noticed
mention.
that there are a few sort of contradictions or incompleteness to what we story that we used to hear. So it's interesting how those things are either omitted or like replaced by something else. But I think that his son was very young, so how old was his son when he left? He might not even realize who
Weeks
his
or
father
months
was.
old, according to other stories that I've read, weeks or months old.
Oh, okay. So his son like couldn't really
He was an infant.
probably know who his
Right,
father even was because there were so many helpers around.
right.
But but his wife, I think, would would say something about how he left his son.
His wife would say what?
Like I would expect, Bodhisattva's wife would say something like that the son will be like without a father, such a good father supposed to be. But I think the good news for everybody that they couldn't believe that he will be coming back. I think uh, that's interesting. Like some of them were saying that he will come back as he promised he will come back, but very few people really expected that. Because if you think about it, he should be coming back better than he was before, so to speak, right? He would have a secret of life or overcoming life and death and overcoming uh,
Yes.
suffering.
Well, I'm just flipping through, and I made some notes in the margins as I was reading this, and it was in the first, 20 or 30 verses of this particular section that we read tonight, where there was some kind of a dialogue between the Bodhisattva and Shanda,
Hmm.
and there was more Dharma involved in that. There were references to the four activities of life. What are the four activities of life? That standing, sitting, lying
Hmm.
down, and walking. That
Hmm.
that everything that he would do would be, whatever he was doing, those activities, it would be with the Dharma, and then there was a little talk here on meditative concentration and bodhicitta, and there was reference to the Buddhas and to the Dhyani Buddhas, the five Dhyani Buddhas, and so on. So, in here is a teaching as well, as to what the Bodhisattva was knew was his motivation, were his aspirations. He knew what was going to manifest. So I think, kind of digging these things out is very good. It's something that I enjoy doing, and being able to see how relevant it is to the rest of the story and so on. And that's why this other part, this emotional part, the rest of this chapter was so unusual, because it was very emotional.
Yeah. Yeah, I would never expect that people would be so lost in their hopelessness when they heard that the Bodhisattva left. It was striking to see the depth of the devastation, and even the city lost its appeal.
Yeah, well, they were thinking of themselves.
Right.
They knew that he was going to do great for other people and everything, but still they were sad because they were thinking of themselves, and that's a human quality. That's not a terrible thing. But Gopa, she was pulling her hair out. She was taking off her jewelry. She was in the process of renouncing everything to join him, because it was obvious that there were conversations that they had that she was prepared for what was about to happen, and now she knew that it was incumbent upon her to join him in the renunciation.
Yeah.
So this is the first time I saw it happening this quickly. I heard, that at some point after, he became enlightened, that she joined with him, but here he hasn't even really gone on into the woods yet. We haven't seen any of that yet in this part of the story.
Did anybody hear like a story about the horse, that the horse was that he actually crossed some river, Bodhisattva crossed the river to get into the forest, and the horse tried to jump following him, and like the horse's heart bursted open, like
I've never heard that. No.
or like had a heart attack or something.
You heard that story?
I don't know. I think some children's book may had it or something.
I see.
That's kind of interesting. But here we see the horse came back. Horse came back. Yeah.
Well, Chanda brought the horse back.
Right, Chandra. But I think in other stories he brought just the I don't know, implements for the
Well, he did the adornments that were on the horse,
adornment.
and the other things that he had brought with him. Yes, and this was the first time I saw that there was a monk who gave up his saffron robes, and he came back, bearing the Bodhisattva's robes or his garments on top of his head. This is the first time I've seen that part of the story like that.
Yeah, and I have a question, like the memorials that were erected. Does anybody know? Like there are actually those memorials till this day?
I can't say, but I think if they were in here, they would be.
I mean, the story was written probably very long ago. I know they survived.
Right.
Now I'm just wondering if there is any places like that.
Bernie,
I
you have any
imagine.
comment about, any of the stories that you've read or anything?
Not really, not anything more than I've said before. It's basically the stories that I've read in the other scriptures, but just more elaborated. Maybe I'm not picking up on the fine details because it's been a long time
Mhm.
since I've read them. But uh, the basic, he left home. He with his attendant Chanda and on a horse, and at a certain point, he told Chanda to take the horse back and changed his garments and went off into
Mhm.
the forest to be a monk, to be a not a monk but a yogi.
An
That's
ascetic,
the
yeah.
basic story, and it's just elaborated here. And of course, one can assume that after he left, his father was heartbroken, and so was his wife. It doesn't take much uh, intelligence to figure out that that would happen. So it's just the basic story, just elaborated on, and I don't really have that much more to add to. And the story is pretty clear. There's nothing that needs to be explained. It's pretty straightforward and clear. So unless I mean, we could go into the details like who are the guardians of the four quarters and what they represent. That would be something, but I'd have to look that up a bit. But what's the difference between Kinara and Kamu Kamubanda demon or something like that?
Well, they're all in the glossary, so,
Oh yes, I'm sure they are, and it's
so
all
we could,
explained there. But yeah, it's that's kind of a detail anyway, and doesn't get to the main point of the story. So
right.
Or maybe we should read the glossary. I don't know how extensive is that. You read the glossary that was sent with the first package?
Yes.
Mhm.
So each of the sutras and from the 84,000 has a glossary, for the words that are pertinent to that particular sutra. But that's very interesting. You can spend hours just going through the glossary and looking at it. So there was something that Alex had said, and I can't think of it escapes me now. Well, anyway, I think we can have an early night of it tonight, unless somebody has some more that you'd like to speak about. Um, I think it's a interesting chapter and something that we'll reflect on, throughout our careers as being a Buddhist, studying this, whether we're a Buddhist or not. You don't necessarily have to be a Buddhist to do this, but just to be able to look at it as a historical scripture or something. So there's a great deal of value to it in many different ways.
I think the what you described as the emotionality or or the sentimental aspect of that,
Mhm.
it could we could just kind of think of that as an illustration of just all the emotional suffering of life. That we talk about the physical suffering of old age, birth, old age, sickness, and death, but the emotional suffering of it. I mean, that chapter really becomes like a long list of the ways people suffer from grief when they lose something they thought they weren't expecting to lose. Just that loss that's created by that sense of loss that impermanence creates. And there's the loss of the son, the child, the loss of the spouse, um, the loss of the expectations of someone's what they were going to do. loss of their presence, the different relationships that Siddhartha had with all those different people, all those different types of losses, and the kind of overwhelming suffering created by such extreme attachments, people rolling on the floor and crying and falling down and just beside themselves, pulling out their hair, just all these very out of control reactions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'll share something with you, from my own personal experience, and that is, back in the day, when I was going through my changes and so on, and my guidebook was the Bhagavad Gita, and and you know and the story is, that it's on the battlefield of going from what would be an ordinary human being to becoming a spiritual being, and the internal battle that one goes through to do that, and all this emotionality and all this kind of stuff, is in there, and so being a spiritual being, is a choice, and at some point of our life, whether we're a teenager or we're a 20 something or 30 something or 40, whatever it is, we go through where we have to start cutting those things off. That's one of the themes that goes through in the tantra and the Buddha teachings and so on, the Dharma and everything, is having to cut things off. At some point you rationalize things, you intellectualize things, how you're going to do this, but there comes the point where you have to stop. You have to cut it off, and to prepare yourself for that, and to try and prepare others for that. And that's a hard thing to do. From my own personal experience, there were mistakes that I know I made by being too abrupt, by not being real and preparing other people and everything. There was pain and suffering that I think could have been avoided, and but something that you have to understand and to live with, and maybe in the next life you kind of get the opportunity to fix. And sometimes you can't do it now. It's like something, if you stole something when you were a kid, and you can't go back to that person that you stole it from. They're gone, they're not in your lives anymore, but you still remember that. And when you're 30 or 40 years old, you remember, oh, I did that terrible thing. I stole that. I did this or something. And I'm going to make up for that by this offering that I'm making to somebody else in the name or in response as an offering for that thing that I did many, many years ago. So there's that kind of an element, I think, in the renunciation and the forgiveness and the compassion and so on that we do.
Thinking about this chapter, I kind of also surprised, like how much active role these gods played in facilitating this Buddha's departure.
Yes.
Much more than commonly told in those stories that we heard. So I don't know what is actual significance of this, but maybe it's like underscores that he was, had previous connection with all these gods while he was still in heaven, and they knew what his goal is, and maybe that's a contrast to people. So the gods are like knowing what the true motivation. They want to assist because they know the truth, and people, they don't really realize the truth. They kind of just thinking about their own ordinary needs and feelings, and their behavior is totally different from God's. Maybe that kind of contrast that was meant to made here.
Well, it's interesting you say that because as I read this the first time, and the gods put everybody to sleep,
Mm-hmm.
and as if he was the only one who was awake. And what is the literal translation of Buddha but the awakened one?
Yeah.
And as we've learned Buddhism, maybe in our early years, it was that it's like waking up, that we've been asleep our whole lives. And there's these veils or whatever of our sleepiness that are being removed, through these realizations, through these experiences that we have and so on like that. So, was the gods putting the people to sleep, was that a reference to that metaphor? Everybody was asleep. He was the only one who was awake.
Yeah, and I guess this also makes a bit of distinguish. Sometimes people confuse awakening and enlightenment. Like I was confusing that for a long time, but I think here it's clearly shows that first there is awakening to the truth of suffering, and there's something should be done with that, and then there would be enlightenment of how to deal with that. So that's another thing that crosses my mind when I was reading that.
Well, I think that's a good thing to think about. Yes, that's a good contemplation. Remembering that all these are conceptual words that we're using to explain that which is non-conceptual.
Yeah, it was interesting read. Yeah, was a imaginative read.
Yes, indeed. Well, unless anybody has anything else you'd like to comment on, we'll move on from this for tonight. And next time, chapter 16 is a very short chapter relative to what we've been doing. Chapter 17 is a little bit longer. So maybe if you have time and you can prepare yourselves of reading ahead, chapter 16 and 17 at least, so we can be prepared to talk about them next time, will be good. And okay. Does anybody else have any other comments about the sutras in general? Doing this practice, is this helping you? I think one of the things it does is it builds confidence in saying we're going to do something that seems like a big task and actually doing it and seeing, oh, these things can be accomplished. These things can be done.
Yeah, I think it's good too. I think, in my normal everyday life, I wouldn't make the time to read through this particular sutra. So it's good to set aside time and just sit there and mindfully go through it in a way that I wouldn't normally do so. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yeah, I think it made sense to start with the Buddha, to understand, who the Buddha in scripture is said to be.
Yeah.
All right. Matthew, do you have anything you want to add? You blanked your camera out. I figured you had something you were doing.
Like stretching and stuff. No, I'm with y'all. No, I don't really think anything beyond what everyone's saying to add. It's definitely an interesting chapter and very flowery and grand, the nature of it, as a lot of the sutras, but it's cool. I'm very happy to be doing this.
Okay. All right, very good. Then we'll turn to the dedication prayer by Lord Jigden Sumgun because it's so comprehensive.
Mm-hmm.
Glorious, holy, venerable, precious, kind root and lineage lamas, divine assembly of yidams and assemblies of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Yogins, Yoginis, and Dakinis, dwelling in the 10 directions, please hear my prayer. May the virtues collected in the 3 times by myself and all sentient beings in samsara and nirvana, in the innate word of virtue, not result in the 8 worldly concerns, the 4 causes of samsara, or rebirth as a Shavaka or Pratyeka Buddha. May all mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me and mine, obstructors who harm, misleading Mars, and the hordes of demons, experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. By the power of this vast root of virtue, may I benefit all beings through my body, speech, and mind. May the afflictions of desire, hatred, ignorance, arrogance, and jealousy not arise in my mind. May attachment to fame, reputation, wealth, honor, and concern for this life not arise for even a moment. May my mind stream be moistened by loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta, and through that may I become a spiritual master with good qualities equal to the infinity of space. May I gain the supreme attainment of Mahamudra in this very life. May the torment of suffering not arise even at the time of my death. May I not die with negative thoughts. May I not die confused by wrong view. May I not experience an untimely death. May I die joyfully and happily in the great luminosity of the mind as such and the pervading clarity of Dharmata. May I, in any case, gain the supreme attainment of Mahamudra at the time of death or in the bardo. Om, Ah, Hum. Om, Ah, Hum. Om, Ah, Hum. May my body, speech, and mind become inseparable with the body, speech, and mind of all the enlightened ones for the benefit of all sentient beings. Thank you, fellas.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Okay. Good night. See you next time.